The game starts with our American paratrooper character, Private Martin, of the 506th Paratrooper Regiment, 101st Division, training in Camp Toccoa in 1942, where we can immediately see that our commander, Fowley, is somehow already wearing a parachute scarf. A very small number of paratroopers would cut these off their parachutes on D-Day, but even this was rare. The image in this poster of a soldier with his M1 in the spawn area is anachronistic for the 1942 year setting of this level, since it is from a poster not created until 1945. During the training course, instead of any appropriate American MG like the M1919 being used, the sergeant fires a German MG42 over our heads when we crawl under the wires. Where did the Americans get an enemy MG42 with ammunition just as it was introduced in mid-1942 to use in a random training camp? Who knows? Throughout the game, mounted MG42s lack any ammo source for them to even fire, and we can somehow fire it without overheating or reloading ammo. Also, both the front and rear sights of the first-person MG42 models are missing. Due to reusing of character models, our fellow paratroopers already have camouflage paint on during training. They are also in their full M42 jumpsuits, including jump boots and combat gear, when they should be wearing their training fatigues. We must make it crystal clear that this, along with a few other inaccuracies pointed out in this video, are very likely caused by quite understandable technical and resource limitations of such an older game as this. However, as always, we put this aside and continue to critically analyze the game's content strictly as just a tool to educate, entertain, and perhaps even provide the research groundwork for future remasters or community historical rework mods, like have been made for other Call of Duty games. One or two of the soldiers here even have the war paint associated with the Filthy 13 on, which you may recognize from this famous video footage of them painting themselves just before boarding their plane before D-Day. As the name suggests, there were only 13 of them. They were a part of the engineers, so not our infantry company, and they only became a thing after the 506th were stationed in England in 1943. The web gear on some of the paratroopers is a shade of green when it should be khaki. All paratroopers in-game have the M1923 cartridge belt. For the airborne, a rifleman would have an M1936 pistol belt with rigger pouches as standard issue. Only a small number of troops of the 501st would wear a cartridge belt. During training, there are soldiers wearing 101st patches, 82nd patches, and invasion flags on their arms. This continues in all missions. These divisions shouldn't train together or wear those patches during training, and invasion flags were only worn by the 82nd in Normandy. Here we pick up an M1A1 carbine with folding stock, even though these weren't developed or tested until late 1942. The rear sight is also wrong, as it is a very late war design, barely used during World War II. The rifle should be changed to an M1 Garand instead here, as it was the most common rifle during this period. We also pick up an M1A1 Thompson, even though this variant wouldn't be standardized until October 1942, 2 months after this mission. The earlier M1928 version of Thompson would be a better choice. The Thompson lacks the magazine release, and the bolt should automatically slam back when empty due to the bolt hold open. The Thompson's rear sight is incorrect and seemingly chopped. It should have a peep sight with a notch on the top. The Mk2 pineapple grenades in 1942 should still be painted in yellow, as they did not start getting painted olive on a large scale until around 1943. A German Coca-Cola tin with a fictional logo design is found in the American base. It should look like these instead. For gameplay and technical reasons, every faction uses the same kind of weird green medkits, which is clearly incorrect. It is also worth noting that despite them being found within German territories, if we look closely we can see that these large medkits or bags are always shown with English letters inside them. During the D-Day briefing, Foley calls it the River Douvres.
The Douvres River estuary here.
Even though it is clearly spelled the River Douvres. It also shows a circle on the map of a causeway. That is your objective.
Baker Company, that's us, has been assigned this causeway here.
However, the circle actually shows the same river and not a causeway. The mission's time states that it is 11:30 PM on June 5th, but the first Pathfinders of the 101st did not drop until 20 minutes past midnight on June 6th. In fact, the first troops aground on D-Day were the glider born near Pegasus Bridge seen later in the game, and they landed at 0:16 hours. Besides, Drop Zone O, next to St. Miraglise, didn't see Pathfinders drop there until 01:21 hours, almost 2 hours later than the mission states. Also, the location itself is wrong, as a 101st Pathfinder would not drop near St. Miraglise. That would be a drop zone and objective of the 82nd, not the 101st. Our unit, the 506 PIR, should instead be landing in Drop Zone C, near St. Marie du Mont, which is 7 kilometers or over 4 miles away. It is important to note that the Pathfinders did not scatter like the rest of the airborne, and mostly hit their targets pretty accurately, so the scattering that happens later is not an argument. Our character is a private, and it is never mentioned if he has a special role in his squad, like assistant machine gunner. According to the TO&E, he should be equipped only with an M1 rifle. However, he did join the Pathfinders, so he could have been allotted a submachine gun, either a Thompson or M3. It is also a myth that many paratroopers carried a pistol, only very few did on their own initiative. But regardless, in no case whatsoever should he be carrying multiple weapons. The M1911's hammer doesn't function or move when firing. All the bolt-action rifles that feed stripper clips always insert full clips instead of just the intended rounds. All the bolt-action rifles don't eject a round when pulling back the bolt while having a round in the chamber, nor covering the chamber in order to prevent it ejecting. Investigating this dead paratrooper hanging from a tree reveals to us a prevalent lack of proper jumping equipment, with there being no life vest, gas mask bag, extra ammunition, pistol belt with rigger pouches, knife strap to boot, or any other specialized equipment. Also, his sleeves shouldn't be rolled up and his chin strap shouldn't be down. All the paratroopers in Normandy should have their uniforms CC2'd, or anti-gas impregnated, which is not visible on any of the skins in-game. It should give the uniforms a darker and slightly stained look. For example, the left uniform in this image is CC2'd, versus the right one which isn't. Many paratroopers have compasses attached to their webbing below the shoulder, but these are wrist compasses, and should always be attached to the underside of the left wrist. The rear sight of the M1 Garand is too large. The bunker that we fight the two Germans playing checkers in is the wrong design. It is based on the Schnabelstand style, similar to the ones in Saving Private Ryan, with a wide but thin observation slit. Moreover, the bunker itself is observing nothing of significance. The bunker instead should be a classic machine gun type, with 1 or 2 machine gun murder holes. Both you and your fellow paratroopers jump from a way too low altitude and are apparently out of your parachute harness immediately, even though in reality this costs considerable effort. After the paratroopers begin their landing, explosions start occurring. However, artillery would not have this area pre-sighted, as they would not have known the landing zones. It also hits a house with an MG42, so is this friendly fire or enemy fire? According to historical sources, even in the Western European theatre at this time, there should be older uniforms like the M40 and M42 mixed among the German and foreign conscripts, not just the M43 we see in game. The only sidearm the Germans are armed with for the entire game is the Luger PO8. Although it still existed among the German army, at least half or a majority of them should be replaced by their standard pistol, the Walter P38. Also, the Luger's safety and its rear sight are completely missing in game. In classic Call of Duty tradition, this map resembles nothing like the real St. Miraglise, with key differences being in its layouts and buildings, such as the church, which in game is way too small and lacks the large square around it. At least one of the US paratroopers has a BAR, which was not in the paratrooper TO&E at this time, which means it should not be issued among them. For the landing sequence, only glider troops were equipped with this gun, but we see none of these in this mission. The BAR is incorrectly depicted with a reciprocating charging handle. If the BAR's charging handle is locked back, it would immediately slam forward after the first shot, then stay at the forward position. And it doesn't have a rear sight for some reason. There are way too many carbines and SMGs. Except for COs and heavy weapon crews, all paratroopers should have an M1 rifle instead. Every half-track in the entire game all have 21st Panzer Division insignia. This would only be location and time accurate for the later Pegasus Bridge missions for the British faction, but of course they don't even show up in those missions. Even worse, they all have SS license plates that need to be changed into Wehrmacht or Heer versions for most of the missions. Although likely inspired by the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment stationed behind Utah Beach during the invasion, there were no Fallschirmjäger in this village. The village was defended by the 30th Flak Regiment from the 13th Flak Division, which didn't have flak panzers like in this mission, and they should appear alongside the 91st Air Landing Division as well, although they only served as regular infantry despite its name. All of the Fallschirmjäger camo overalls only have Unterofficer insignia attached to them, while the non-camo overalls seem to get the wrong shade of grey colour rather than the greenish looking ones. This vehicle that keeps appearing throughout the game is likely meant to be either a 2cm Flak Veering auf Fahrgestell Panzer IV or Karl Wilhelm Krauss field modified Flak Panzer IV. However, there was only one prototype of the first vehicle to ever exist, and only 3 for the latter. Although it looks similar to the Verbal Wind, the lack of shield protection on a turret made us believe otherwise. The German crews on these flak panzers have a reload animation. However, the guns are still able to fire by themselves at a slower rate of fire somehow while they are still reloading. Also, the fire rate of the gun is ridiculously too high, and they never overheat from this non-stop firing animation. The vehicles are painted in a plain dunkelgrau or dark grey colour. At this stage, the base colour for at least the majority of the German armoured vehicles should be dunkelgelb or dark yellow. We can see that parts of the village are already in a bombed out state. This is impossible as St. Mir-Église had not received any sort of bombing or shelling prior to June 6th. We can find a wrecked Panzer IV Aust H in the village. These kinds of tanks should not be around here on D-Day, especially not wrecked like this. The German tanks have a strange camo scheme. It appears to be based on one of the ambush patterns, but the colour is so washed out and the pattern looks too large. Apart from that, all the vehicles are missing identification markings, like the company numbers or even divisional insignia. German soldiers throughout the game are armed with way too many MP40s. Only NCOs and sometimes assist squad leaders would be armed with them. The daytime defense of the village states that it begins at 7:30 AM, even though the village didn't receive an organized German counterattack until 9 AM in reality. We are once again attacked by German paratroopers. In reality, the Ost Battalion 795 Georgian of the 709th Infantry Division made the attack, and they were also supported by a few tanks and Stugs. The Tigers we see in game were not present here. We are then tasked with blowing up the non-historically present Tiger with a Panzerfaust, but in actuality the counterattack withdrew and no armor was destroyed. Later on June 7th, an American paratrooper did manage to knock out a Stug with a 57mm AT gun, but even this was on the edge of the village. Other German armor knocked out in the area, mostly by Shermans of the 746th Tank Battalion, was all outside of the village. The Tiger tanks have the same problem as the Tiger we mentioned in our Battlefield 5 video. It is an Auf H version, however it still has its smoke launcher on the sides and air filters on the back. It also has rubber road wheels, which you could argue that they'd still have by 1944, but not by the later 1945 levels, especially in Berlin. The scoped Kart 98K should have either a proper German number 1 or number 4 reticle. Despite being the same weapon, the scoped Kar 98K doesn't share ammo with the regular unscoped version. The map we have been handed looks to be a modern recreated map that you would find in an information boot. A real map would have less clutter, better scaling, and have a standardized color scheme used by the Allies, as all seen in the one shown on screen now.
Hand this directly to Major Shepard. Tell him Baker Company has secured the town, but won't be able to hold it long if we don't get relief soon.
There was a headquarters at Sainte Marie du Mont, but it was primarily for the US 4th Infantry Division and was not yet set up by the game's date and time, as the village had not even been secured yet. A centralized HQ had not even been established at this point, let alone that every individual paratrooper would know about it. The wild car chase in this mission was never recorded to have happened in reality, and also makes zero military sense. It's really ridiculous that we have to drive several miles to Sainte Marie du Mont to deliver a situational report. This wouldn't happen. Hijacking a civilian transport could happen, but walking there would be much less dangerous. Sergeant Moody even mentions this when he says,
"Oh yes sir, you bet. We ride through enemy lines in a French tin can. Want to paint a bullseye on it, sir?"
He's absolutely right. It's not like the 101st could be of much use. Their mission was to secure Carentan, not defend Saint-Mire-Église. That's the job for the 82nd Airborne. Even the route that Captain Fowley draws for us is rather idiotic. Rather than taking the less risky route by driving east through the known drop zones, which at this point would be likely cleared, and then head south, we instead are told to drive south and then east, which would be the path of most resistance. Once again, the environment looks nothing like the real N13, and way too many tigers keep showing up. Our player now partakes in the Brecourt Manor assault, but he should not be here because, as we know, he is in Baker Company, but the actual assault was done by Dog and Easy companies. Although the airborne at first thought they were going to destroy flak 36 88mm guns, it turned out to be 105mm Geburtshauwitzer 40s in reality. In the game, however, they are still 88s. The layout of the gun battery is completely different from reality, and much larger compared to how it originally looked. There were no Folsom Jaeger at the battery or manor. It's unclear which unit manned the battery exactly, but it was likely artillery troops from the 191st Mountain Artillery Regiment of the aforementioned 91st Luftlandau Division. In real life, the attack never reached the manor. The paratroopers destroyed the guns and then fell back when this was accomplished. The manor was cleared and taken later by a different attack with armored support coming from Utah Beach. Like the battery itself, the manor in real life looks very different from what is shown in game. In the last bit of the mission, new troops show up. Judging from the camo patterns on their uniforms, they are supposed to be Waffen SS, but these shouldn't be here either. At this point in time, there should be no Waffen SS in the Utah sector yet. However, if the developers were trying to shoehorn in the look of Panzer Grenadiers, which for some reason became an umbrella term to describe Germans with camo uniforms in several video games, then they should have used hair camo uniforms instead of Waffen SS ones. Even this would be wrong in this mission though, since there weren't any Panzer Grenadier units in the area at the time either. Additionally, the insignia on their colours are missing, and their camo patterns seem to be oak leaf A-spring, but the helmet cover is pretty badly modelled, with its pattern being too large and some in the wrong shapes. The German soldiers all wear jack boots, while in 1944 many more should wear the low boots with gaiters, especially depending on the division, while for hair troops both kinds of boots could appear in a mixed manner. This next mission sees us perform a Special Forces rescue operation in the heart of Germany, but pretty much all of this is of course completely fictional and would be extremely risky and almost sure to fail in reality. Despite being an elite unit, there was no records of the 101st troops ever doing a covert operation. SAS or SOE operatives would be far more suitable to be chosen for this job.
Meet us at the front of the chateau.
The term chateau would be incorrect for the area. Perhaps it's meant to be a chalet. A chateau castle would be called a Schloss in Germany and Austria. This vehicle is a Ford V3000S, however the cab and the engine are out of proportion. The next level brings us to a POW camp with the fictional name of Dulag 3A, which seems to be a combination between the camp names of Dulag Luft and Stalag 3A. It does share a similar resemblance to Stalag 17B, however the location of this camp does not at all match with what is stated in game, overall meaning that this camp is likely not based on any particular one and is just fictional. The camp has Major Ingram as the only prisoner for some reason, with almost every building intended for POW sleeping quarters only being filled with Germans. Clearing up an entire camp and converting it into a military used one just to guard one VIP prisoner would be extremely unlikely and strange. It must have been that the game perhaps didn't have the processing power to generate a full prison camp or something. Furthermore, Captain Price was rescued from the Alves Chateau on August 7th, 1944, and he later pointed out that Major Ingram was kept in the camp nearby. However, since this later rescue mission was conducted on September 18th, 1944, there would be a high chance that the Germans would have decided to move him to another place, or even just execute him right after the raid on the chateau. It would be considered quite lucky that both Price and Ingram weren't shot on sight by their captors when the American assaults began. In the loading screen journal of the previous mission, the protagonist, Private Martin, mentions that both Ingram and Price were shot down, meaning the two must have been related or working together on some sort of mission. If they are both on an SAS mission, then it would not make sense to why Captain Price is wearing a Denizen smock and Major Ingram is wearing a P-37 with jerkin and commando insignias. The final American campaign mission takes place during the Battle of the Bulge in 1945. In the base game, this level is located in the finishing epilogue and mixed in with a British and Soviet level, but to avoid confusion we will move and cover each of these levels under the title of their respective characters' nationalities.
Much of their success must be credited to the Russians, who at Stalingrad, during the winter of 1943, destroyed many of the Germans' best panzer divisions.
We believe that giving credit to just Stalingrad as a place where the German panzer divisions lost their capabilities is too much of an exaggeration. It would make more sense for it to be the entire Eastern Front as a whole.
These rockets, although some of the most advanced weapons of the war, are too inaccurate to hit military targets. Instead, they are being used to terrorize London.
London was not the only target for V2 rockets. Some other cities in Europe were targets as well. Likely due to reuse assets, our characters in this mission still wear the old khaki brown of the M42. The M43 winter uniform for the airborne looks alright, but they are wearing bundles of jump ropes from their belts, even though they hadn't made a combat jump in over 4 months. They'd get rid of these quickly after landing. All the paratroopers are wearing jump boots, while at this point in the war some of them should also be wearing M43 buckle boots. They are also wearing the 101st Division patches on both shoulders. It should be only on the left. Some of the soldiers still have scrim on their helmets. This was basically not done during the Battle of the Bulge. While there were a couple of pillboxes in the Phi Noaville area, this bunker system in game is way too elaborate. The bridge that crosses the frozen stream is huge and no such bridge existed in the area in reality. The 2nd Panzer Division by this point had only 14 Panthers and 10 Stugs, which were used to assault the 506 in Boisjacques back in December 1944. By January, however, the 2nd Panzer Division in Nouville was running on its last legs, after losing many of their vehicles, meaning they would likely not even have enough for this small counterattack. Now moving on to the British perspective to focus on the men of the 2nd Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, the Gliderborn as part of the 6th Airborne Division, and their mission to capture Bennoville Bridge, which later became known as Pegasus Bridge, and the neighbouring village of Bennoville. Some Gliderborn troops are wearing their berets. They would definitely all be wearing their helmets when crashing into the ground in a glider. The berets are also the wrong shade of red. It should be maroon for the British Airborne. The patch on their berets is a parachute patch where it should be a glider patch. And lastly, they're wearing them pulled down to the wrong side. The coloration of the British web gear is too light. Our character is a sergeant. This means he is either the platoon sergeant and should be equipped with a Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark I, or the sergeant of the special weapons section, which means he should have a Sten Mark V. While the British Airborne did carry M1911s in certain roles, sergeants did not. It is rumoured that many NCOs still carried Lee Enfields out of fear of being sniped, since only SMGs were carried by officers, so the Enfield would be appropriate for both roles, just not the Bren we get in game. The glider-borne troops would be equipped with the Mark V Sten, not the Mark II or III. The heat shield for the Sten is non-existent, it uses a flat cylinder instead. It also incorrectly uses a notched front sight instead of a triangular one. There's barely any barbed wire to be found anywhere around the bridge, even though there was a wire perimeter they had to cut through in reality. All of the streetlights are on, probably for gameplay reasons, but Normandy was in blackout during this time, as was most of Western Europe, meaning they wouldn't be on. This pillbox is wrong. There should be a smaller bunker/pillbox which used to be the Nipsarong house that was demolished in April 1944, and its cellar part was converted into a pillbox in reality. Here the developers have created another way too large Saving Private Ryan style concrete bunker with 2 machine guns to replace it. Also, there probably wouldn't be this much of a fight for it. Most of the German fire came from the other bank as the German sentries were completely overwhelmed. There are also way too many Germans initially defending the bridge in this mission. Although the bridge itself and the famous cafe on the other bank are modelled closely to their real-life counterparts, there's an 88 flak here in a place where there should be a KWK 39 5cm gun, in a much smaller concrete ring stand. This is probably due to development restrictions. However, as to prove our point, the actual ring stand and gun still exists to this day, shown here on screen. A 5cm was used to fire at a German patrol boat in the afternoon in reality, but definitely not to fight off a bunch of German tanks like we do here. Even worse, our character somehow manages to single-handedly use an 88mm flak, despite needing a crew of at least 2, or normally up to 10 to properly load, aim and fire. The German forces only have the Flak 88 as their anti-tank weapon in the entire game for some reason, while the widely used Pak 36, 38 or 40 are nowhere to be found, not to mention the aforementioned KWK 39 that should be in the ring stand. The first tank that gets blown up is actually close to the position where a German tank was knocked out. Platoon Sergeant Martin Charles Wagger Thornton used a Piat to destroy the first German armoured vehicles during the battle. Although he claimed it to be a Panzer IV, other sources say it was probably a lighter tank or armoured vehicle instead. In contrast to reality, there are no civilians to be seen anywhere, including the Gondray family who were living in the cafe. As a matter of fact, Mr. Gondray actually dug up hidden supplies of champagne bottles from his garden to share with the Brits during the morning. Again, all the goddamn tigers, none of these were present at Pegasus Bridge. The bridge was counterattacked by units of the 716th Static Infantry Division and later by the 21st Panzer Division, not the Fallschirmjäger and SS troops we see in-game. The tanks also consisted of lighter ones in reality, like captured French tanks and Marders. Despite the casualties, British paratroopers defending the vicinity seem to be fewer in numbers than what they're supposed to be, most likely due to the old game engine. 181 men landed to capture Bennoville and Ranville bridges, of which half fought around Pegasus Bridge and Bennoville. During the assault, only 2 of them were killed, and even during the daytime defense, only 18 more were killed around both bridges. There are way too many enemies among the counter-attacking forces using STG-44s in this period of time. In order to compensate for the lack of weapon variations, some Gewehr 43s and MG-34s that later appeared in the United Offensive expansion, along with the aforementioned P-38, should have made their appearance throughout the 1944 to 1945 missions. The STG-44's safety is always on, so how we manage to fire the weapon is perplexing. The player doesn't press the magazine release for the STG-44, and same goes for the MP-40. It makes no sense for enemy tanks to come from the north of our side of the canal. All German armor would have come from the Kong direction to the south. German troops should also not be coming from the east side, as that is where our fellow airborne troops are holding the Ranville Bridge. The arm patch of number 4 Commando should be changed into number 3 Commando unit instead. This unit, as part of the 1st Special Service Brigade, is the first one that could be able to reinforce the 6th Airborne Division at the bridge sectors at this time. Also, there shouldn't be any insignia on their green berets.
Captain Price, Sergeant Evans, welcome to 3 Troop. These are the locations of the major hydroelectric dams in the Ruhr industrial region of Germany.
Yeah, once again, this entire mission is pretty much fictional, with a sort of Medal of Honor secret operation style. There were no further attacks on the dam after Operation Chastise, which they mentioned in the briefing. 3 Troop 2 SAS would at this moment be in the middle of France causing mayhem during Operations Hardy and Wallace, not in Germany destroying the Eder Dam, not to mention how ridiculous it would be just to send 2 SAS operatives and 1 commando to destroy the entire dam, especially considering that it would undoubtedly be defended by a much tighter security force since the aforementioned Operation Chastise attack. This image from the loading screen shows Kriegsmarine German Navy personnel operating a 2 cm flak-veering, with it also being a horizontally flipped version of the original image. We don't see any of them in the mission however, so their appearance here doesn't really make any sense. For our suggestion, despite the extremely limited info on the dam defenders, at least the flak operators in the dam area could be Luftwaffe flak crews, and they can also appear again in the upcoming airfield section along with other Luftwaffe personnel as well. Although some of the buildings around it seem to be similar to the ones in reality, the overall appearance of this map looks much different from the real images, including the ones in the game's cutscenes. None of the flak-veering guns have a base or concrete ring stand underneath them. The Waffen-SS are now seen with hair visor caps. This leads us to further believe that the developers might have tried to implement the weird earlier mentioned Panzer Grenadier logic while not knowing the difference between hair and Waffen-SS camo and insignia. Plus, it is quite strange to see a rather large number of regular army troops and Waffen-SS defending the entire dam area together far behind the front lines, and even Folsom Jaeger troops mixed with the one Waffen-SS soldier in each truck driving during the chase sequence. Sergeant Evans can somehow operate a flak-veering 38 AA gun on his own, despite it requiring more than just 1 person or a maximum of 5 people to operate in a proper manner. As seen in several missions, the Ju-87 Stukas are flying and attacking way too low to the ground. Also, this many Stukas making an appearance here is questionable, as the Ju-87 served only in a nighttime role by 1944 on the Western Front. It is possible that they are just being used here as a hasty emergency defense against a British attack, but regardless, we can clearly hear that they are still somehow equipped with the iconic Stuka sirens, which had stopped being fitted around 1941. The Focke-Wulf 200 Condor is a quite rare vehicle at this point in the war, with only 276 made, with a good portion being destroyed at Stalingrad and at the Battle of the Atlantic. It would make much more sense to replace it here with a much more prevalent Ju-52. Once again, this level where we attack the German battleship Tirpitz is another fictional Medal of Honor styled mission. In reality, there was a sabotage operation called Operation Source from the 20th to the 22nd of September 1943, carried out by British commandos manning mini-submarines or X-craft. They managed to place demolition charges on the hull of the ship, heavily damaging it. However, the ship itself didn't sink, and its repairs lasted over 6 months. Nevertheless, no British commandos ever boarded Tirpitz itself, and the ship was sunk by Avro Lancaster bombers on the 2nd of November 1944. There are way too few Kriegsmarine personnel on the ship, despite the majority of them being on shore leave throughout the Hakoya and Tromsø region as mentioned in the loading screen. That means that there are hundreds of combatants still on the ship that would easily overwhelm a few enemy operatives, making it highly unlikely for our characters to escape. I mean, just sending 2 SAS operatives and 1 commando to cripple an entire battleship with hundreds of Kriegsmarine on board? Yeah, that will end well. Oh. All of the regular sailors have a Gefreiter as insignia of ranks, and Ordnance NCO's career insignia for some reason, and their side cap is way too small. The naval officers seem to have a low-effort version of the insignia portrayals on them, notably the breast eagle and cuff silver insignia, which imply that they could be Kriegsmarine high-grade technical officials, as designated to the civilian naval officials unit. There are way too many MP40s for the Kriegsmarine personnel. They should be decreased and mostly replaced by the Kart 98K, along with additional weapons in some or few numbers, such as the Mauser HSC pistol that was used by some German naval personnel, the MP28 and maybe a few MG34s. We find American dynamite sticks in the German battleship. It could be argued that perhaps the Norway resistance had prepared this, but this would have been unlikely and would have not gone unnoticed by the German naval guards on board. When boarding the Tirpitz, Captain Price is allowed through upon presenting his papers, which our character is not asked to show to for some reason. We later see Price throw these papers onto the ground, revealing the photo inside to be of a young naval cadet, so not even an officer, who also does not at all look like Captain Price. The game mentions in the loading screen that the enemy unit for this mission is battery number 445. In reality, the enemy unit should be V2 battery 485 or 485 heavy artillery battalion, which seems to have been supervised by SS personnel. In February 1945, battery 3/485 was responsible for firing rockets from Heek and Dartfeld near Burgstein Fort, so at least the location seems to be somewhat correct here. As for the uniforms, we believe stationary troops would not have parkas, but instead regular greatcoats in winter with the correct insignia. It also doesn't seem like they were attacked and destroyed in February 1945, as they kept on operating until March 31st. It would be more appropriate for these SAS men to wear British Army World War II snow smocks instead of regular uniforms or Denison smock. The blast radius of the V2 rockets in-game is just pitiful. Our character should have to set the time for detonation to occur after we get inside the bunker or leave the area entirely. While playing through many games like all the Call of Duties we analyze, one unfortunate thing of note is the often steep prices even for older titles. But this is where our sponsor G2A comes in to help. G2A is an online marketplace that offers all kinds of different games, software, DLCs, gift cards, and other digital entertainment for PC and consoles at great prices with instant delivery. For example, this copy of Call of Duty Black Ops 3, including DLC 5 Zombies Chronicles, going for a mere $18, an over 70% decrease when compared to its usual price of $65. There is also currently a spring sale on G2A.com, where we can find even more great deals by using their new discount code G2A Spring to get offers of up to 20% off. So to save money on your favorite games and items, be sure to check out G2A by clicking the link in the top of the description and pinned comment. Now moving on to the Soviet campaign, where we take the perspective of Alexei Voronin of the 13th Guards Rifle Division during the Battle of Stalingrad. Although the terrain along both riverbanks in the Stalingrad sector would be steep at times, it would not have been these exaggerated rocky bluffs and cliffs portrayed in the game, especially from the shore we take off from in the very beginning of the mission.
There will be no mercy for defeatists, cowards, or traitors.
There exists no real evidence that blocking detachment officers would read to the soldiers crossing the Volga. As we will go on to see further on, it is very obvious that this scene, along with many others in this theater, are inspired by the notoriously inaccurate film Enemy at the Gates, which did portray the blocking detachments very poorly. In reality, most of the river crossings by the Soviet faction were conducted at night, and the first crossing attempt made by the 13th Guards Rifle Division was made on September 14, 1942 at nighttime. There was actually a risky daytime crossing on September 15th, which was conducted under the cover of a smokescreen, and it sustained a considerable amount of losses in the process. A crossing like shown here on the game's presented date of September 18th did not happen, however. Many of the Red Army soldiers wear M43 version tunics and wool padded jackets instead of the appropriate M35 and M41 versions respectively. Like the German naval side cap, the Soviet Polotka cap seems to be too small, and way too many of the Soviets in the first two missions are wearing them instead of a mix with the proper SSH-40 helmets at the very least. It is worth mentioning that just like several other World War II video games featuring the Eastern Front theater, the game fails to recognize or include at least some or few of the Asian ethnic minorities among the Red Army. According to actual photos and film footage, many of Stalingrad's buildings near the Volga riverbank in-game are way too tall. The, again, way too low flying Stukas that attack the boat are based on the earlier B models, as later models had a higher bulge in the cockpit window, and despite hearing the Jericho trumpets, none of the Stukas have them, but this could be related to low poly counts on these models. They also have the earlier painted Balkan crews on the wings, which should instead be the later versions with a thicker black line seen in this photograph. In addition, these Stukas are all incorrectly shown with plain insignia. They should have more markings. Together with that comes incorrect fire rate of their cannons. They would instead be armed with 2 machine guns and 1 250 kg bomb. It is also worth mentioning that although air raid attacks right on the boats did happen in the battle, it should not be considered the norm by the media. At this point, the Luftwaffe pilots acknowledged from their job experience that attacking directly on these small boats is impractical, and made more sense to consider the targets on land instead.
The one without the right follows the one who has the right. The one with the right kills. The other one must take up his rifle and shoot.
Again, another major myth and inaccuracy taken from the absolute BS Enemy at the Gates film. While logistical issues during the Battle of Stalingrad were possibly a thing, it is not the beginning of Operation Barbarossa anymore where the Red Army did encounter these kinds of issues, and the fact that the Soviets really gave everything they had to defend the city at all costs. This detail is kind of odd to portray here, and if there was a shortage of any particular research for the Stalingrad defenders, particularly the 13th Guards Rifle Division within the period of the battle, it would be ammunition. Our character Alexei is said to be a corporal according to the wiki, but that rank did not exist in the Red Army. The closest thing would be a Jafreiter, which is the deputy squad leader or senior rifleman. In that case, he would always be armed with an SVT-40 if available, and otherwise a Mauser rifle, no other weapons. So many barrels with German writing can be seen at the docks for some reason. Also, the words and symbols on some of the ammo boxes are evidently written backwards. It is also worth mentioning that at this stage, the ammunition storages would be kept deeper inland or hidden underground to prevent them from being destroyed by German artillery or mortar bombardments and air raid attacks. The term Commissar was already abolished in August of 1942 and replaced by Zampolit or political officer since then. In addition, the Soviet political officers' uniforms are a complete mess. They are equipped with anachronistic shoulder boards with wrong color tabs. They also got blank color tabs and shoulder boards with red piping, implying that they are designated to artillery units rather than infantry, not to mention the lack of rank insignia details in both color tabs and shoulder boards, which also happen on the officers with M35 tunic models as well. In this period, they would wear the normal M35 infantry uniform with officer badges with regular infantry style collar tabs and stars on their sleeves. This Stalingrad's Red Square is very likely to be inspired by its real-life counterpart, the Square of the Fallen Fighters. Judging from this building that looks similar to the Univermag department store, also what is left of the fountain and large pillar that looks similar to the ones in the real square. However, the Univermag building is misplaced, as it is located in the southern side in the game instead of the north, and the rest of the square looks almost nothing like its actual counterpart. You may recognize this square from its slightly improved version in COD 2, the even more inaccurate depiction of it in World at War, or ironically enough, although still containing minor mistakes, the best version of this particular location in this franchise, that being from, and I cannot believe I'm saying this right now, Call of Duty Vanguard.
No retreat! No one step back! No mercy for cowards! Open fire!
Yet another example of why one should never use films like Enemy at the Gates as a historical source. It is a quite well-known fact nowadays that Stalin's not one step back Order Number 227 is portrayed in certain movies and games in an over-exaggerated way. Soviet troops could retreat if they were allowed to do so, and the order was mainly aimed at officers. Executions did happen in the Red Army, but blocking departments were rarely used for gunning down friendly troops. In most cases, they just tried to send fleeing soldiers back to the front lines, or even retreated along with them. As in the Battle of Stalingrad, there is a record on September 14, 1942, that one of the detachments opened fire above the heads of retreating soldiers in order to force them back to their previous defensive positions, but never at a time all directly at them. As for those among the blocking departments and rearguard troops, they should be either regular troops or NKVD soldiers with proper uniforms and insignia for the time period, while the officers can wear NKVD blue gallifet trousers, since the NKVD units, particularly the 10th NKVD Rifle Division, indeed existed and also participated in the battle in the central sector. This large Stalin statue seems to be based on the one from the set of, wouldn't you guess it, Enemy at the Gates again. The only era-appropriate possible real-life counterpart would be the one in front of the Museum of Defense of Tsaritsyn, which used to be known as Reknikova House, but even this statue is much smaller than the one seen in game. Despite the appearance of a low-effort version of these Maxim machine guns laying around the blocking department machine gunners, it is strange that all of the Soviets use only captured MG42s as their main machine gun throughout the entire game. As for our recommendation, most of them should be replaced by the DP-27. The standard M91/30 Mauser Nagant in the game is fitted with a bent bolt. However, the bent bolts were designed for the sniper rifle variants of the Mauser fitted with the scope in 1941. The PPSH-41 incorrectly fires in a closed bolt manner. The German M43 tunic is definitely anachronistic for the Stalingrad setting. It should be the M40 instead. Throughout the Eastern Front related missions, some of the Germans could be equipped with captured PPSH-41s and SVT-40s, based on what actually happened throughout the Eastern Front, while a few Soviets can use German captured weapons like German SMGs and MGs as well. The scoped version of the Mauser lacks the front sight on the rifle. In reality, PEM scopes were more common in 1942 rather than the PU scopes we see in game. Hell, even the real Vasily Zaitsev, who was the soldier that Call of Duty's favorite source, Enemy at the Gates, was based on, used the PEM scope during the battle. At this time, German armoured vehicles in the battle should have a dunkelgrau or dark grey colour. Also, these mid to late Panzer IVs seen throughout every Stalingrad related mission should be replaced by at least the Stug 3 Auf F and even the Panzer 3 Aus J.
We've retaken Red Square.
It is unlikely that the German forces had recaptured the real Square of Fallen Fighters area, along with the area close to the riverbank in the central landing stage sector on September 18th. To match the actual events, the date should be changed to September 15th or 21st instead. For the Stalingrad setting, the MG42s must have the early slab-sided horizontal handle on it, although there is a possibility of the existence of some early prototypes with an MG34 style charging handle made of wood at the time. Nevertheless, the guns themselves should also mostly be replaced by the MG34. The game's version of Waffen-SS troops in this setting must be removed. Despite the possibility of some SS personnel in the battle, the large-scale SS combat units never existed in Stalingrad. Although this particular mess might again be the result of the aforementioned Panzer Grenadiers term, nevertheless, according to several photographs from the battle, the camo smocks or Zeltpan among Herr soldiers are either rare or unlikely to be used in Stalingrad, except certain variations of Herr camo helmets that indeed existed in uncommon numbers. In addition, there's also a possibility that splinter helmet covers were never used by the 6th Army in the battle, but instead should be Hungarian camo, captured Soviet ammo bar camo, Hessian cloth and rubber band for example. The station building of Railway Station Number 1 seems to be based on its modern post-war version. During the war, the station's appearance should be the 1931 reconstructed version, also known as Stalingrad 1, which originally looked like this before getting destroyed during the battle. When the next level brings us into the train station, we can see that its surroundings and intersections also don't match with what appears in several historical photographs, notably the much smaller and mismatched arrangement of the area in front of the station and behind it in-game, together with the absence of the famous Barmely Fountain and other landmark buildings. Although in reality there were still some Soviet troops surrounding in a pocket near the Railway Station Number 1 area in this period of the battle, notably those led by Lieutenant Antov Kumich Dragan at the nail factory in front of the Railway Station Number 1, they are unlikely to be stuck this deep behind the railway station areas. However, the latter could be possible, but only if the date setting was changed to September 15th instead. After taking the train station, Alexei's diary mentions he is promoted to a junior sergeant, and it is suggested that he is now a sniper. Snipers would be privates attached to platoon HQ. A junior sergeant would lead a squad. This also means that he would now always be armed with a submachine gun. In Stalingrad scenarios, that would most likely be a PPSH-41. The 4-story building on Penzenskaya Street that Major Zubov is referring to here was real. It was later nicknamed as the Lighthouse and would be more famously known as Pavlov's House. However, although Soviet defenses against German counterattacks of it occurred up until November, the real initial Soviet attack on the house, led by Sergeant Yakov Fedotovich Pavlov, happened on September 27th, not November 9th, or in the winter at all as portrayed in game. Plus, it was supposed to be a stealth attack at first in the nighttime, not day. The only sidearm seen used by the Soviets is the Luger PO-8. Although a few could still appear as captured weapons, most of them should be TT-33s instead. There is a prevalent lack of variation among the German winter uniforms throughout the winter section of Stalingrad, and their appearance in-game is too clean looking in general, which stands in contrast with photographs of the soldiers of the 6th Army during the time of the battle. Plus, there are way too many German soldiers wearing parkas that are also coloured a bit too green when they should be more greyish. German soldiers in winter conditions more commonly wore greatcoats. The STG-44 needs to be removed completely for this time setting, since it did not enter service until 1943, although its predecessor, the MKB-42H, was used in 1942, there isn't any exact evidence of its appearance in this battle. There is an artillery bombardment and a group of bombers chasing us after the sniping sequence. However, according to memoirs of Georgy Potansky, one of the house defenders, quote, the enemy was reluctant to use heavy bombing because of the risk of hitting his own forces at the nearby house of railway workers. Neither the enemy air force nor our own bombed the area around Pavlov's house, the mill, and the 9th of January square because the lines were too close to each other, end quote. In addition, although the Soviets did use their own artillery to halt the German attacks, this would unlikely be the case for the German side. When the firefight begins around Pavlov's house, there should be fire support by Soviet soldiers from nearby buildings. The Pavlov squad technically didn't capture the building alone. When we look at the layout of Pavlov's house map in this mission, including its description from multiplayer, and compare it with the real location, we can evidently see just how messed up it is. Firstly, judging from the compass, two important landmarks are misplaced. The apartment that was inspired by the partially ruined Zavotny house should be located to the south of Pavlov's house, not the north, and in a closer distance without any fictional line of wall between them, while the 9th of January square should be located on the north and northwest side of the house. Secondly, the Grudenils mill building on the east and the misplaced Zabotny house to the north should be longer, including Pavlov's house itself. And lastly, the Volga River should be visible to the further east of the map, behind the mill and other ruined buildings as a background. The PTRS-41s in Pavlov's house hold infinite ammo and can be held down to fire automatically somehow. It also lacks a front sight and has a non-functioning bolt. Even worse, every round it fires is incorrectly depicted as an explosive round rather than an anti-tank one. Plus, they should both be placed on the 4th floor to avoid direct fire from the German armoured vehicles as they were in reality. The PTRS-41 shouldn't be able to penetrate the Panzer IV's front armor, as the PTRS can only effectively penetrate 40mm of armor, and based on the model of Panzer IV shown attacking, they are the Oust H models, with 88mm of front armor. Heavy counterattacks to retake the house with several tanks is unlikely, since the area was not considered to be that important to the Germans anymore, even back in late September when the Pavlov assault actually happened, so it could be just a regular attack with German troops with optional minimal armor support from a few Stugs or German recon vehicles. The Germans can be seen approaching from all directions, despite the fact that the Zabolti house and the mill should be occupied by Soviets, as in reality. In the game, they seem to be empty and undisturbed. All the counter-attacking troops are equipped with only MP40s and STG-44s. Most of them should have Kart 98Ks, with some variants like the MG-34, Gewehr 41 and captured Soviet guns. The character that was based on the real Sergeant Yakov Pavlov can be killed during the defense of the house. However, the real Pavlov did survive the war. The Soviet tanks that arrived later at the end are the anachronistic T-34-85, rather than any proper T-34-76 models, either the 1941 or 1942 versions, and they noticeably don't have any proper insignia featured on them for the entire game. It's quite bizarre that so many Soviet tanks arrive in the vicinity at the end, despite rather being more suitable and needed elsewhere, especially up north in the industrial districts, and some even approach from the direction of the enemy occupied areas. The reinforcements at the end could be a large group of regular soldiers from the 7th Rifle Company or the 3rd Rifle Battalion of the 42nd Guards Rifle Regiment 13th Guards Rifle Division. We are now brought to fight in Warsaw, but as of the mission's presented date, January 17, 1945, the Germans should have abandoned Warsaw and retreated a day earlier on January 16th. This mission would make more sense if the combat scenarios would happen in the outskirts of the city, not in the middle of it. In the beginning, we hear two soldiers talking about racing to Berlin.
Store open.
I hear that our generals are racing to Berlin.
However, the real race for Berlin would not occur until after the Vistula-Oder offensive, not during. The only tank factory in Warsaw, the National Engineering Works, was dismantled and its machinery was sent back to Germany following the invasion. While it could be possible this factory could be used for small repairs, any large repairs and constructions like we see in game would be almost impossible. All the tanks in the factory seem to be painted in only the Dunkelgrau dark grey colour. However, in late 1944, the base colour of the unfinished no camo ones should be possibly painted in a dark red colour instead, or as in early 1945, it can also be olive green colour. Nevertheless, the previously used grey colour can still be mixed in but in fewer numbers, while the amount of those with dark yellow and proper camo versions could be higher. The tank crews who get out from the destroyed German tanks seem to wear only reused hair visor caps with black colours. Without any proper tank crews piping, they should be replaced by proper Panzer field caps along with proper uniforms. Our objective is to regroup with soldiers from the 4th Army, but the 4th Army is at this moment stationed in Iran, unless they mean soldiers of the 4th Tank Army, but they are still over 90 miles away in Kielce, not Warsaw. Despite vast combat experience as infantrymen, to put the protagonist as a tank commander seems to be highly unlikely and quite risky, although possibly due to lack of human resources, as mentioned in the loading screen, which was actually surprisingly apparent even throughout the later stages of the war, but nevertheless just changing into a different character would be more appropriate here. The document in the loading screen is signed by Colonel G.V. Andropov, 2nd Guard Tank Army, and says that the crews are veterans of the Battle of Kursk, but the 2nd Guards Tank Army was never deployed to Kursk. They were deployed on the Bryansk front, and still in reserve. They were eventually deployed during the counter-offensive, Operation Kutuzov, but saw limited combat. The document also states that we are less than 70 kilometers away from Berlin. However, geographically, this wouldn't make any sense, as the Soviets had not crossed the Oder River by this point, which is nearly 80-90 kilometers away. Even some units that had crossed the river a few days later, taking the town of Kainitz, but they were still over 70 kilometers away from Berlin. In reality, the 2nd Guards Tank Army's road to Oder was very unopposed. German forces had already begun their retreat behind the river. The 2nd Guards Tank Army never reached the Oder, however, as they were redeployed against a German counterattack from the north during Operation Solstice in February of 1945, thus making this whole mission complete fiction. Despite being a main stray for the German tanks in the mid to later stages of the war, we believe that there are way too many Panzer IVs here. At least they should be supported by other kinds of armoured vehicles, like Stugs and other anti-tank guns. The following level brings us to the Battle of Berlin on April 30th, 1945, where we have to clear the northwestern area near the Königsplatz first. However, the 3rd Shock Army had already cleared a part of this area a day earlier on April 29th. After that, they were pretty much just preparing for the assault on the Reichstag and began it later on April 30th. Plus, the northwestern area depicted in the game doesn't look even similar to the real one at all. Notably, the Ministry of Interior buildings, Balke Bridge, and Spree River are missing, with the environment looking off in general too. Berlin was the very last stand of the German forces, and saw its defenders consist of a mixture of pretty much everything and anything. For accuracy's sake, we should see dozens of different units and uniforms, ranging from elite units full of veterans to ragtag units composed of militia and inexperienced second-line troops. Among the Reichstag defenders, the majority of them should be German and foreign volunteers of the Waffen-SS, mixed with regular Allgemein SS. The others should be a mix between some German naval infantry sailors, inspired by the Gross Admiral Donitz Battalion in the Battle of Berlin, along with other units such as Volsturm, Hitler Youth, Heer Army Soldiers, and Fallschirmjäger. There is only one German paratrooper seen in this mission, as to represent what was left of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Division in the Battle of Berlin, there should be more included. In reality, it took several hours of bloody fighting for the men of the 3rd Shock Army to cross the Königsplatz, clear out the nearby Kroll Opera House, along the other defensive positions, and finally reach the Reichstag in the evening, not all rapidly in just a couple of minutes. To better depict the scale of fighting, our recommendation would be to expand and split this level into multiple missions, like what was done with the other battles featured in this game. This is by far one of the worst representations of the Königsplatz in video games. However, this was 2003, so it could be forgivable. Nevertheless, the distance to the Reichstag is really short. The anti-tank ditch and several positions on the west side are missing. Ruined fortified buildings should be right of the entrance, and the rest of the Tiergarten Park is replaced by buildings, with the Brandenburg Gate also being completely absent. To match the real battle, there should be Axis soldiers, including a few tanks and other armoured vehicles, defending the Königsplatz as well, not just soldiers hiding inside the Reichstag. Judging from maps of the battle, we seem to approach the Reichstag from the northwest of the Königsplatz square. However, it was soldiers of the 380th Rifle Regiment, 207th Rifle Division that did this in reality, not the 150th Rifle Division we are in. Instead, we should approach from the central and south sides. The general details of the Reichstag's exterior and interiors are mostly fictional, missing, and just plain weird, such as the strange looking dome, missing Halle, and its northern and southern corridors, weird conference hall layout and design, missing Germania statue, and so on. Similar problems still happen with the iconic World at War version seen later in the series, but once again the strange irony occurs here, as the best version of the Reichstag's dome section and its surroundings in the franchise is, surprisingly enough, the newer version of the dome map from Call of Duty Vanguard. Although it contains some inaccuracies for gameplay reasons, to us this just goes to show that game developers, especially in more modern days, when they have the capability to do so, certainly can portray things correctly if they just put in the effort.
Perhaps I treated you too harshly.
In reality, the whole building, especially its interior, was badly damaged from the Reichstag fire in 1933, which was not repaired until after the war. So, as it was also in World at War, these flags and other decorations inside at this stage are fictional. Due to heavy fighting inside the building since the evening of April 30th, 1945, the Red Army soldiers were only able to put up flags which ranged from official ones to handmade ones above the building during nighttime, not only just one, and not during broad daylight as portrayed in this game and in World at War II.
Today, I crossed the Elbe River in Germany and shook hands with an American soldier.
The 150th Rifle Division of the 3rd Shock Army never reached the Elbe to link up with American forces. The first contact between the two forces was with the American 69th Infantry Division and Soviet 58th Guards Division, which happened on April 25th before later fully linking up on the 26th, about 4 or 5 days before this mission. And so we are left with a total of over 200 historical inaccuracies. For more, click on this video where we analyze all the inaccuracies of this game's sequel, Call of Duty 2. Thank you to G2A for sponsoring this video. Big credit to our research team including Farizum, K9, Davidson, Munancho Inc. and Paddock Mad Lad. All key sources and links are in the description. Thank you for watching. This has been the Frosty One, out.